Hello everybody, it's your non-binary pal Gracious E.V.A here, and welcome to another OC redesign video. The last one I did was of Zach, which you can watch this video to learn more about. The whole project made me think about another character that at this point needed a bit of reworking as well, and that character was Kris. Unlike Zach, Kris has actually made some appearances on this channel in different speed paints. I've talked about his character, but as a bit of a recap, Kris is a part of a future story of mine called Guardian Angels, and is one of these guardian angels for the gods of death. Basically, he's kind of my default angel character, and he's very shy and kind, but a bit insecure, and his story deals a lot with identity and working through mental health, but we'll talk about that more later. Kris was always a character I had an easy time with personality-wise, but his design at the time had just become too outdated, especially compared to Zach. So I decided to get out my sketchbook and try out some character concepts. Going into this, I had a couple of design things I wanted to include, but I want to talk about those when I show his final design. I ended up just sticking with one page of sketches for Kris, and I especially really like this dress shape and this hairstyle. Something I wanted to work on this year was adding more interesting shapes into my character designs, and this definitely spoke to me for that reason. Once I was done with these, I put them into my computer along with some extra reference and began working on his ref sheet. I actually ended up adding quite a bit on this. For his new design, I kind of didn't really use a lot of the elements from his old design other than the basic shape of his dress. I gave him a bit more of a triangular body shape and made him a lot taller. For his hair shape, I went with the bangs I had sketched initially and made the rest of his hair extra long and swoopy. For all of the angels in the series, I wanted them to be based off of different flying animals, and for Kris, I always wanted to base his design off of a mourning dove. Not only does it make a lot of sense for his story, but also we have a rescue mourning dove, and we have lots of doves flying around where we live, so it's a bird I'm pretty familiar with. With that in mind, I changed his hair color to be completely gray, being slightly darker at the top and having these sharper stripes, I guess, of light gray at the bottom. Originally, I wanted to make his hair look like bird feathers, but I just couldn't figure out how to draw that and make it look good. I'm really happy with this though, and I also think the feather hair would have just been a bit too on the nose. Male mourning doves also have spots of pink and blue feathers, which almost appear iridescent, so I of course had to include that here. I gave him pink eyes and these blue markings on his chest and neck, which actually represent how he died. Now, the hardest part of this design was the dress. I played around with a couple of different options for the cut of the dress, as well as different color combinations. His original design was very monochromatic yellow, and although it definitely worked for him at the time, I also wasn't sure how it would work with the dove theming. In the end, I couldn't decide between yellow or blue for the dress, so I included both in the ref sheet. But honestly, I think the yellow is still my favorite, plus I included some pink elements for contrast and a cute light blue hair accessory. It was kind of hard to include his wings in this, but I ended up going with a very light gray color and blue tips. And with all of that, Kris's new design was complete. I'm very happy with how it turned out, and I feel like it's definitely a leveled up version of his original look. And just like for Zach, I drew him a full body sprite too, so while I'm drawing that here, I'll talk about Kris as a character and his story. Last time I talked about how Zach dies saving a friend from a car crash. That friend was Kris, and since he and Zach were extremely close, this left him with a lot of survivor's guilt and overall sadness and loneliness. In fact, Kris had massive feelings for Zach that he never expressed, so this just added on to all of that. In the story, he visits Zach's grave almost every day and keeps a journal with him that he writes about his feelings in. He'll even write updates about his life and he'll read at the gravesite. Zach was actually there when Kris was reading all this, but he obviously doesn't know that. About a year later, Kris would actually meet his end when he died from drowning. I'm still working about the details of that, but I know that he was defending himself from a thief or assailant of some kind, and that led to this. This is where the markings come in. I've talked about how the afterlife works in detail last time, and because Kris drowned, he gets these markings that represent his lungs. When Kris enters the afterlife, however, he is chosen to be one of the most powerful types of angels, a guardian angel. Unlike how normal guardian angels work in angel lore, they are in charge of protecting and serving only two people, those being the gods of death, who I've also talked about before. Although the video is a bit old and I probably will give them a fresher design at some point, you can still watch that for a bit of extra context if you would like. The guardian angels are powerful because, well, their job is to protect the gods, so they would probably want to be pretty powerful. And there's actually only one other guardian angel, who I'll talk about at a later time as well. Kris was always a very shy and timid person, hating confrontation, and he was always felt guilty for staying quiet. But he was also very kind and protective and grows to be a stronger person. As you can see, Zach and him are meant to be foils of each other, and you might be wondering how Kris reacts when he finds Zach in the afterlife. But he doesn't actually know it's them. Zach changed a lot before Kris got there, but that's all I have to say about that now. Kris is also very feminine, but he actually really struggled with that in his life and tried to hide it. This version of the afterlife is all about second chances though, so he definitely comes to terms with that part of his identity. And the last thing I wanted to do for his redesign is to create an artwork. It took a while to come up with a drawing for him, but I had this thumbnail planned out that I didn't have a character in mind for, so I thought that it would be perfect for this. For this, I even colored this sketch, which I've been trying to do more often because it helps tremendously in the later stages of my artwork. I just tend to forget to do that because I just forget to. I went with a color palette similar to my classic sunset scheme I use, but a little pinker. This ended up being a very dreamy scene with Kris sitting in a pond that's reflecting the sky and a little bit of faint rain pouring down, which I created with these with a specific brush for. I experimented with some brushes for that and some papers from his journal coming out. I'm gonna go ahead and let some of the speed paint play out here, but one thing that I did later on is forget to record a good chunk of the rendering process. So once we get to that spot, I am going to go by layer of what I did so that there's not a huge gap in between the first section of the footage and the last bit. So here's the part where I forgot to record. I added ripples to the lake here with the ripple brush, and the blending version of that brush. Added some cool effects here. And I added blush to Kris's skin, and for his eyes, I mostly did the normal things I do when shading eyes, but I did do something different here where I actually added a gradient to the iris and a multiply layer to draw an outline of the pupils first before adding this in to add a bit more depth, and I think that worked really well, and that's part of the reason why I really wanted to show what I did so I could show the different thing I did there. And also for the underpainting, I added a bit of a secondary color for the highlight area to make it look brighter, and I picked the shading colors and started with the cell shading and painterly shading. Moving on from that, I did a little overpainting like I've been doing and moved back to the background to adjust it since there were some things I wasn't happy with. One thing that was really challenging was the papers, which I tried drawing by hand at first, but then gave up and switched to a brush I found. But then that was a bit difficult because of the way the particle settings were at. Regardless though, I rendered the pages slightly, adding the text, and tried creating a technique of blurring them as they got closer to the viewer. I did this in order to create a field of depth and to create a bit of a focus effect. So like when you have your camera focused on one thing and then everything everything else blurs out, you know, that sort of thing. I think I like this effect quite a bit here. A couple of other things that I did to play around with the style here, I wanted the line art to be a bit brighter, but not too brighter, so I duplicated the line art folder and played around with blending modes to see what looked best, and then also added a bigger shading block to one side of Kris's silhouette here, just to make it look more in shadow. And after that, I added a few more sparkles and shines, like I always do, and I was done. And that was everything for this redesign. I love how this turned out, and although it wasn't a complete transformation like the last one, I'm glad I did it because I've been wanting to use some of these ideas for his design for a while now. If you like this video, you can check out the last one I did, and I'll probably have some more characters that I'll redesign in the future, so you can subscribe to see more of that. And just like with Zach, I will be using Kris more in videos too. And yeah, you can check out my current comics that I'm posting on Webtoon and all my other artworks. All of that is linked in the description on my link tree. I'm glad I have that now because it's a lot easier to put in the description. Just one link rather than like 5. So yeah. But anyway, I hope you all have enjoyed this video and have liked this new character, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.